They said the ballroom was beautiful, a forgotten jewel of a dying town, still shimmering under layers of dust and silence. Everyone who visited admired its haunting charm, but no one ever asked why the third floor was sealed, why every blueprint was edited, why people entered the hotel and came out changed. This isn't a ghost story. There are no demons, only rooms full of memory, and mirrors that reflect more than your face. What if grief could be designed? What if obsession wasn't a feeling, but a place? You're about to walk into the Atwell Grand, and you might not leave the same. That IT was the kind of envelope you don't recognize at first. Not because it lacks markings, but because your mind isn't ready to receive what's inside. Pale cream, slightly creased at the edges, no return address. The ink barely darkened the paper itself, as if the sender hoped it would dissolve into your pile of unopened bills and appointment reminders. But I knew, even before I opened it, even before I saw the jagged scrawl of my father's lawyer detailing the final rights and duties of a daughter long estranged, I knew this would drag me back to Halverton, to that town smothered in autumn fog and regrets, where silence clings heavier than dust. My name, Claire Atwell, was written across the front of my father's unmistakable hand, the same hand that never once reached out after I left, that never called, that only came back to life, it seemed, when he had finally lost his own. He was gone, heart failure in his sleep, the lawyer said. Peaceful, apparently. I laughed, short, bitter, undeserved. Peaceful was never a word that belonged to Raymond Atwell, especially not after what happened to my mother. Especially not after what he became. The days following the letter blurred into a strange fog, flashes of hurried flights, cold coffee in airport terminals, the awkward tension of returning to a place that had mourned you in your absence, if it had acknowledged your leaving it all. The house hadn't changed. Peeling white paint, porch light dangling by a wire, the welcome mat still lied, but the air felt denser, as though the wind remembered my childhood screams and whispered them back through the cracks in the siding. Inside, it smelled of varnish and mildew, the persistent scent of memories that never left. His things were untouched, tools lined up in symmetrical, near-sacred precision. The piano in the corner still shut, the key my mother once wore around her neck now hanging on a rusted hook by the door. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Grief is strange like that. It doesn't always wait in line behind logic. Sometimes it skips ahead and punches you in the chest before you've even decided whether you want it. I wandered through the house like a stranger in someone else's skin, touching nothing, but remembering everything. The sharp corner of the kitchen counter, where I'd cracked my chin at 5, the notch in the wall from when he threw the photo frame, the attic door, still padlocked, though I no longer felt the curiosity to know what he kept up there. But it wasn't the house that brought the unease. It wasn't even the memory of my father's last words to me. You're nothing without this town. No, it was the hotel, the Atwell Grand, that monolith of brick and sorrow perched on a hill like a cathedral to a forgotten god, closed for decades, boarded up, its once grand facade now strangled by ivy and shame, and yet still admired. People still talked about the ballroom, the chandelier, the marble floors, the music, as though beauty could erase history, as though the hotel hadn't been part of what hollowed out this town. My father loved that place, more than he loved us. Sometimes. He'd been a bellhop once, when he was young, then a manager, then, as the town shrank and the money dried up, its last remaining caretaker. Even after it shut its doors, he'd go there, fix windows, dust corners, talk to the walls like they were old friends. I remember watching him from the road once, back when I still visited. He stood at the window of the ballroom, silhouetted against fractured light, unmoving, like he was waiting for something, or someone. When I asked him what he was doing, he only said, listening. I never asked again. Now, in the wake of his death, I found myself pulled back, not by grief or nostalgia, but by something subtler, heavier. The will stated it plainly. The Atwell Grand now belonged to me, the last surviving heir. The town's cursed crown passed from one unworthy hand to another. At first, I considered selling it, burning it, letting the ivy finish the job nature had started. But there was something else. In the final pages of his will, scribbled in less formal language, he'd written a note, a plea. Claire, don't forget the ballroom. It remembers you. I read that line 3 times. My breath stilled. I hadn't stepped inside that place since I was 12, since the night the music stopped and my mother vanished without a trace. They never found her. No body, no answers, just an empty hotel room on the 3rd floor, a room that, in the police report, didn't technically exist. I never told anyone what I heard that night. Not the police, not my father, not even myself, in the quiet spaces of memory. But reading that sentence now, in his dying hand, unearthed something inside me, a crack, a thread, a buried note of unfinished music. I couldn't leave it alone. So I went. The hotel loomed like a story waiting to be rewritten. I drove up the winding path in silence, tires crunching over gravel that hadn't shifted in years. The gates were still there, half-hinged and ornamental, guarding nothing. I parked beneath the shadow of the facade. The main entrance was chained, of course, but the side servant's door still open with a key I'd kept on my old necklace, tucked in the back of my jewelry box, forgotten until the night before. Inside, the air was thick, the kind of stillness that swallows sound. Dust floated like memories in suspension, and yet the ballroom glimmered, just as I remembered. Light pierced through fractured glass above, casting broken rainbows across the floor. The chandelier hung precariously but proud, like a queen holding court. The parquet floor, though dull, showed traces of polish. Someone had been caring for this place. Even now, especially now, my footsteps echoed unnaturally, like I wasn't alone. But I was. Of course I was. I moved toward the center of the room, drawn by something I couldn't name. And there, in the dust, I saw them, my own footprints. Fresh, leading inward, but none leading out. My chest tightened. I turned, expecting to see someone. Nothing. Just the vast, silent beauty of a place too proud to decay. And then I saw it. On the far wall, where once portraits of founders and benefactors had hung, there was now only one frame, covered in cloth. I approached, heart pounding without permission. I pulled the cloth. Beneath was a photograph, a faded black and white image, a ballroom filled with dancers, the chandelier in perfect clarity above, and there near the back, barely visible but unmistakable, a young girl, me, standing at the edge of the frame, staring directly at the camera, eyes wide, expression unreadable. The photo was dated 25 years ago, the night my mother disappeared, the night I was told I was home, asleep in my bed. I stumbled back, breath jagged. No one could have staged that. No one even knew I was there that night. I hadn't told a soul. And then, beneath the frame, scrawled in the wooden trim, as if carved by a nail or knife, "She remembers." Do you? I didn't want to. God, I didn't. But memory isn't a door you can close. It's a ballroom. And once the music starts, you're already dancing. The next morning, sunlight scraped weakly through the high, dust-choked windows of the Atwell Grand, casting long amber ribbons across the ballroom floor, where time itself seemed to stagnate like stagnant air in a sealed jar. I stood beneath the chandelier, not moving, as though any gesture might shatter the illusion that something within this space still breathed. My hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, not yet, but from the overwhelming weight of unspoken things pressing against the walls, against my chest, against memory. I hadn't slept, not truly. I'd spent the night in my father's house, curled on the living room couch like I had as a child when thunder cracked the sky and my mother hadn't yet disappeared. But the weight of that photograph, of those impossible footprints in the dust, followed me like a question that couldn't be ignored. I returned to the hotel with a flashlight, a crowbar, and a notepad, as though logic could dissect what emotion had already unraveled. The ballroom greeted me like a cathedral might welcome a sinner. No judgment, just a quiet expectation, confession. Dust whispered across the floor as I stepped inside. The chandelier groaned slightly above, swaying ever so gently in air that hadn't moved all morning. I scanned the room carefully, noting the preservation of detail. Despite its abandonment, the ballroom remained astonishingly intact. The gold leaf moldings, though faded, still curled in delicate patterns above the walls. The floor, a mosaic of walnut and maple parquet, bore only minor warping. In the far corner, a small stage stood veiled in shadow, the crimson curtain heavy with age, closed tightly as if to guard the secrets behind it. I made my way toward it, brushing cobwebs from my sleeve, noting the faint scent of polish. Someone had maintained this, long after the public had forgotten it. And yet, every record claimed the hotel had been vacant for over 2 decades. I climbed the steps to the stage slowly, my fingers grazing the edge of curtain. A sudden sense of trespass bloomed in my gut, like I was peeling back the edge of something sacred or profane. Still I pulled. The curtain gave way reluctantly, sending a puff of stale air into my face. Behind it was nothing more than an empty platform, except for a grand piano, draped in a thick gray sheet. I stepped closer. The cover was damp in places, stained by time. I pulled it back. The piano gleamed faintly beneath layers of grime, its black lacquer skin still intact, though dulled. The keys, ivory yellowed and chipped at the edges, reminded me of teeth. I sat on the bench without thinking. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, hesitant, almost reverent, and then I pressed a key. The sound was sharp, discordant, wrong, like something screamed beneath it. I recoiled, heart quickening. But there was no echo, nothing but the quiet crackling of dust, settling once more. I stood quickly, knocking the bench backward, and paced away, trying to push back the sudden surge of memory. My mother's hands had once danced over these keys, filling the hotel with song during holiday galas. She had been the hotel's private pianist during its final years, performing for increasingly smaller, sadder crowds. I remembered watching her from the side of this very stage, my chin resting on the ledge, as she smiled at me with eyes full of aching beauty. The memory hit so hard, I staggered. I needed air. I rushed to the tall, arched windows and forced one open, gasping against the cool morning. Outside, the town blinked beneath a haze of dew and silence. The main street was empty, as always, shops with shuttered windows, a gas station that never changed its prices. A single figure walked below, an old man with a cane, who paused and looked up directly at me. We locked eyes. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared, and then he nodded once, slow and deliberate, before continuing down the road and disappearing behind the trees. The nod wasn't warm. It was more like acknowledgement, recognition, like he knew I had finally returned, and that I wouldn't be leaving, not unchanged. I turned back to the ballroom and found myself drawn again to the portrait on the wall. My own face, childlike and confused, still stared out from that black and white photograph like a ghost watching its own funeral. I hadn't noticed before, but now I saw that someone had left a small chair beneath the frame. A child's chair, blue, chipped at the edges, the kind you might see in a kindergarten class. My breath caught. It hadn't been there the day before. I would have noticed. I would have tripped on it. I approached slowly. On the seat sat a small book, red leather, cracked, barely holding together. A journal. I picked it up, hands trembling. The first page read, R. Atwell, Ballroom Log, Maintenance and Memory. My father. Of course. I flipped through the pages, fingers scanning familiar loops of his penmanship. Some entries were mundane. Polished floor, repaired north window. Others were not. The girl came back again, stood by the piano, did not speak. Another, third-floor light flickered all night. No electricity connected. Must check wiring. And another, dreamed of her voice again, woke with fingers bleeding. My stomach turned. The entries dated back to years after the hotel had closed, long after my mother vanished, long after he should have stopped coming here. But he never did. He was watching, listening, returning again and again. But why? What held him here? What did he hope to find or avoid? The last entry chilled me. Claire will come. I see her clearly. Same red coat. Same questions. She'll hate me, but she has to know. The ballroom remembers. I dropped the book. My heart thundered. I hadn't worn that red coat since college. I hadn't even packed it this trip. Yet the moment I read those words, I could feel its familiar weight on my shoulders. I ran my hands down my arms, half expecting the fabric to be there. But it wasn't. Just goosebumps. I needed answers. I needed to understand why this place felt like a heartbeat, like a memory you couldn't leave behind. I wandered the edges of the ballroom, seeking hidden doors, loose panels, anything. And near the west wall, partially obscured by a collapsed sconce, I found a crack in the plaster. I pried gently. A panel loosened, revealing a hidden cavity behind it. Inside was a box. Small, tin, rusted shut. I forced it open. Inside were photographs. Dozens, black and white and color. Faded Polaroids. All of the ballroom. All taken from slightly different angles. But always empty. Always, almost empty. Because in the far edges of each frame, a figure lingered. Never clear, never full, but always there. A shoulder, a shadow, a hand on a curtain. Sometimes a face. Watching. Never the same person. Never completely visible. But always, unmistakably in the room. I flipped through them quickly, my breath growing shallower with each image. And then I found one that stopped me cold. It was dated the night before. Fresh. Color. Clear. And in the center of the ballroom was me, standing by the piano. My red coat bright against the gloom. I hadn't worn it. I didn't bring it. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Who took it? When? How? And more importantly, why? Outside, the clouds thickened. Thunder rolled far in the distance, though no storm had been forecast. I placed the photo back in the box and closed it, sealing it like a secret I wasn't ready to know. As I left the ballroom, I cast one final glance at the chandelier. It no longer swayed, but I knew it would again. I knew I'd return, because the ballroom had opened a door in me that could no longer be shut. And somewhere, deep in its foundations, the past was waiting. Patient, perfect, and unfinished, I had barely slept again, though the sun was up, slanting to the curtains of my father's old house in thin, reluctant bands, illuminating the faded wallpaper and the dust that clung to every surface like decay in motion. Something about the ballroom had entered me, burrowed deep like a splinter too far under the skin to pull out. I tried to distract myself with practicalities that morning. Calls to property management offices, half-hearted attempts to find a structural engineer willing to assess a building most considered an eyesore. But the silence on the other end of those calls said more than words. Atwell Grand, they'd say with hesitation, "You sure?" And when I confirmed, they always found an excuse. Booked. Too far. Not equipped. A man even laughed before hanging up, like I just asked him to exhume a corpse for fun. I drove into town later that day, needing air, needing anything that didn't smell like would rot in grief. Halverton was smaller than I remembered, smaller and sadder. The buildings looked tired, the people even more so. Some storefronts were still open, an old grocer, a hardware store, but others were boarded up, their signs still hanging with sun-bleached letters that hadn't advertised anything in years. As I walked past the diner, heads turned, conversations stilled. A woman in her 60s, wearing an apron dusted in flour, stared at me from a window with an intensity that made my stomach twist. I pushed open the door, and the little bell above it gave a strange jingle. The scent of coffee and bacon drifted toward me, warm and familiar, like a lie told kindly. I sat at the counter, pretending not to notice the eyes. A waitress approached, maybe late 50s, her hair tied up in a neat bun, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. Her name tag read Jean. "You're Claire," she said, not asking. I nodded slowly. "Haven't seen you since—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Didn't need to. Your father came in here every Tuesday. Ordered the same thing. Sat in the same booth. Never brought company. Always paid in cash. Never tipped." I managed a weak smile. Sounds about right. She poured me coffee without asking. "You staying long?" "I'm sorting out the estate." "You keeping the hotel?" "I don't know." She leaned in slightly. "You should let it go. Let the land take it back. Nothing good ever came from that place." I met her eyes. Why? What do you know about it? She hesitated, then glanced around the room. Everyone was pretending not to listen. She lowered her voice. That ballroom's cursed. Not with ghosts or demons. Nothing like that. Cursed in the way poison seeps into soil and makes nothing grow. That's just superstition. Is it? She wiped her hands on a towel. There's a reason your father never left it. He used to be normal. Had friends. Had a smile. After the hotel closed, he started changing, talking to himself, writing letters to people who were dead. Started sleeping there, lost in memories, like he was waiting for a performance that never came. You sound like you knew him well. Knew your mother better, she said, her voice tightening. She used to come here after rehearsals, played the piano like it meant something, like it was the only place she could breathe. What happened to her? Jean's eyes darkened. I don't think she ever left that hotel, but there was no body. Doesn't matter. She stopped being part of the town the moment she started playing for the Atwell Grand. That place pulls people in, doesn't let go, and not always in ways you can see. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that this was all just small-town mythology, but part of me was listening, really listening, because I remember the look in my father's eyes the last time I saw him. Distant, hollow, and the way he used to sit in that ballroom, staring at nothing. Jean took my silence as surrender. You want advice? She said. Don't go back in there. Lock the doors. Burn the keys. Walk away. But I couldn't. Not now. Not with what I'd found. And not with what I'd begun to remember. Outside, the sky had turned a strange shade of gray, like storm clouds had passed or forgotten to rain. I walked back to my car and found a note tucked under the wiper blade. A small piece of paper, folded neatly. My name, written in careful block letters on the front. Inside, don't open the west wing. That was it. No signature. No other markings. My chest tightened. Someone was watching me. Someone knew I had been inside. I drove back to the hotel with every nerve on edge, scanning the rear-view mirror, wondering if I was being followed. The hotel stood exactly as I'd left it, monolithic and still, a husk of grandeur. I parked near the side entrance and climbed out slowly. Every sound felt louder, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots, the distant cry of a crow, the rustle of leaves. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The ballroom was empty. The photograph still hung in its place. The journal still sat in my bag. But now, every creak and groan of the building felt personal. I moved toward the west wing cautiously. I hadn't explored it yet. My father's journal had barely mentioned it, only once, in an entry marked with smeared ink. Don't let her go west. Now I stood at the threshold, staring at the long hallway that stretched into darkness. A velvet rope hung limply across it, as though that could keep anything out or in. I stepped over it. The corridor was narrow, the wallpaper peeling in long strips like dead skin. Every door I passed was shut. Some were marked, storage, guest services. One simply read, private. I paused at that one, feeling an odd pressure behind my eyes. Then something made me turn back. Not fear, not yet, just instinct. I would need more time, more light. I needed to prepare. As I left the corridor, I felt something shift. A coldness behind me. Not wind, not movement, just presence. I turned, but there was nothing. Only the hallway. Empty. Still. Watching. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I stayed at the house, reading through the journal by flashlight, marking passages with trembling hands. The entries grew more erratic toward the end, less maintenance, more memory. I heard her music again today. It came from the third floor. The ballroom creaks like it's breathing. Sometimes I think I see Claire, but she's still a child. She never grew up. And finally, the hotel was never meant for people. It was built to remember. I didn't understand that line. Not fully, but it echoed in me, like I'd always known it. The next morning, I returned to town. I needed answers. Needed someone else who remembered. I found the old man from before, the one who had nodded to me from the road. Sitting outside the library, reading a newspaper that looked older than the building. I approached him slowly. He looked up before I spoke. "She's got you now," he said. I froze. "What?" "The ballroom," he said, folding the paper. "You've been inside. It remembers you. That's how it starts." "What do you mean it remembers?" "It don't forget. None of it does. That's the trick. Most buildings rot. Forget. But not that one. It holds on." "To what?" He looked at me with eyes too clear for someone his age. "Everything." I tried to press him, to ask about the third floor, about the west wing, but he shook his head. "You won't find answers out here," he said. "Not the ones you need. You'll have to go deeper. But don't forget who you are when you do. The ballroom's good at making people forget." I walked away, heart hammering. The weight of their words pressed into my spine. Jean, the old man, the note, they were all afraid, all certain that the ballroom wasn't just a place, but a memory with walls, a story that refused to end. That night, I sat in the ballroom again, alone. The light was dim, but I didn't need to see. I just needed to listen. And somewhere, faint and far away, I thought I heard it. The first few notes of a piano, playing a song I hadn't heard since I was a child. By the time the fourth morning broke, I had stopped marking the days. Time in Halverton had begun to stretch and warp like waterlogged wood. Its rhythm no longer aligned with the rest of the world. The air of my father's house clung to me when I slept, if you could call the tossing and turning sleep. My dreams were no longer dreams, but recollections with bent corners and warped timelines, where my mother played the piano endlessly in an empty ballroom, while I stood outside in the rain, watching her silhouette flicker with every lightning strike. I woke with her name in my throat and the impression of keys beneath my fingertips. I made coffee without thinking, staring at the swirling surface like it might scry answers. I didn't drink it. Instead, I stared at the table where I had laid out the collection. The journal, the Polaroids, the faded floor plans I found rolled up in my father's study, brittle with age and stained at the edges with something that might have been rust or dried blood. There were inconsistencies, doors on the blueprints that no longer existed in the building. Whole rooms accounted for that I had never seen. And the third floor, the floor I'd been told was condemned after water damage and instability, was marked differently. On the paper, it wasn't labeled third floor at all. It was labeled observation tier. And below that, in my father's small, precise handwriting, a single note had been added. Structural fiction, only visible from within. I didn't understand it, but I would. The blueprints consumed me that day. I spread them across the ballroom floor, beneath the chandelier, trying to match the paper to the physical space around me. The dimensions almost aligned. Almost. But things shifted. Angles too narrow to exist. Stairwells that curved into blank walls. And at the center of it all, a circle. Not a room. A space. A chamber of some kind, buried between the ballroom and the third floor, like a wound stitched into the hotel's anatomy. I followed the hallway toward the west wing again, this time with the blueprint in hand, stopping at each door to compare its frame and position. Everything matched, until I reached the storage room. According to the plans, there was supposed to be a stairwell behind it, a narrow passage leading up not to the third floor, but something adjacent to it. I pried the door open. The hinges screamed. Inside was nothing but broken shelving and old linens. I searched the floor carefully, knocking against boards, feeling for hollow places. Near the back corner, beneath a collapsed rack, I found one, though it gave under my weight, revealing a hidden trapdoor, sealed with rusted bolts. My pulse quickened. I fetched tools from the truck outside, crowbar, hammer, a lantern for good measure. It took time, patience, and more force than I'd like to admit, but the bolts surrendered eventually, one by one, until the door creaked open with a groan that sounded more like a sigh. Beneath it, a narrow stone stairwell spiraled down into darkness. Not up, down. My breath caught. The blueprints had been wrong. Or worse, deliberately misleading. Still I descended. The air was cold, damp, and metallic, like the inside of a crypt. Each step echoed strangely, as if the space below had no end. I counted 23 steps before I reached the landing. At the bottom was a small room, carved into the earth itself, the stone walls slick with moisture. In the center stood a table, wood, rotted, covered in dust and cobwebs. And atop it, another set of blueprints, newer, cleaner, laid out as though someone had been reviewing them recently. I brushed the dust aside and froze. These weren't blueprints of the Atwell Grand. Not exactly. They were diagrams, human diagrams, charts detailing observation patterns, emotional response tracking, environmental stress testing, and at the top, stamped in red, Phase 3, Hallucination Correlation Study. My blood ran cold. This wasn't architecture. This was experimentation. I flipped through the documents, each one darker than the last. Psychological triggers, environmental manipulation, social isolation conditioning, all with one common variable: prolonged exposure to the ballroom. The word repeated again and again. Ballroom, ballroom, as if it weren't a place, but a concept, a mechanism, an instrument. I stepped back, breath ragged. My father knew. He had to have known. He didn't just care for the building. He was part of this, complicit, or worse. I left the chamber quickly, sealing the trapdoor behind me, hands shaking, heart hammering in my chest like it wanted to escape. When I emerged back into the light of the ballroom, the chandelier swayed again, just slightly, as if to greet me. I stood there, trembling. Something wasn't right. Something was fundamentally wrong with this place. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was built to do something, to evoke, to fracture. I walked outside into the cold evening air, needing distance, needing clarity. But the town was waiting. As I passed the grocery store, the woman behind the counter stared at me. A child on a bike stopped mid-pedal and whispered something to a friend while pointing. I wasn't Claire anymore. I was the woman from the ballroom. I returned to the house only to find the front door ajar. My chest tightened. I stepped inside, calling out, but no one answered. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But my father's journal, which I'd left on the kitchen table, was now open to the final page. A page I hadn't seen before. The ink was fresh, as if it had just been written. You found the stairwell. Good. But that's not the truth. That's just the edge of it. Go to the ballroom at dusk. Sit beneath the chandelier. Wait. She'll show you what I couldn't. I stared at the page, every hair on my body standing on end. Who had written it? Was it him? Or someone else? Someone still watching? The sun dipped low behind the hills as I sat on the porch, clutching the journal to my chest, trying to summon courage. Not just to face the ballroom again, but to face whatever truth my father had buried here beneath blueprints and silence. I would go back, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me already had. Dusk fell like a closing curtain. No stars, no moon, just a suffocating smear of purple and gray bleeding across the horizon, casting the Atwell Grand in a silhouette that looked more like a tombstone than a hotel. I stood at the entrance with the journal clutched tightly to my chest, heart battering against my ribs like a warning. I had no answers, only instructions. Sit beneath the chandelier. Wait. That voice, whether written by my father's fading hand or someone else's entirely, had buried itself deep inside me, and I obeyed because this wasn't about curiosity anymore. It wasn't even about grief. This was about truth. And truth, I was beginning to learn, often waits with teeth bared. I stepped inside. The ballroom was quiet. No music. No echoes. Just a low groan of the chandelier's ancient hinges and the faint hum of something electric deep within the walls. Something I hadn't noticed before. I walked slowly to the center of the room, tracing the same steps I had as a child, and lowered myself to the dusty floor. The boards creaked beneath my weight like they remembered me. I sat cross-legged, staring up at the chandelier as the final light of day filtered through broken glass, and I waited. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time blurred. The silence grew heavier. And then a sound, a soft shift of air, a click, like a latch releasing somewhere just out of sight. I stood, hard in my throat, eyes scanning the walls. Something had moved. Behind the stage, the velvet curtain fluttered. not from wind, but from pressure, as though the space behind it had just exhaled. I stepped toward it, each footfall louder than the last. The curtain yielded without resistance. Behind it, instead of the familiar empty platform and piano, stood a door, old, wooden, painted the same deep crimson as my mother's favorite lipstick. It hadn't been there before. I know it hadn't, but I reached for the handle anyway. The metal was warm, too warm. I turned it. The door opened into a narrow hallway that shouldn't have existed. The blueprints hadn't shown this. No journal mentioned it. The walls were raw wood, unfinished, damp, and covered in photographs. Thousands. They were stapled, nailed, glued into the wood like a patchwork skin. I stepped inside. The air grew thick, musty with age and rot. My breath caught as I scanned the images. Every photo was of the ballroom, the chandelier, the stage, the guests, people dancing, laughing, crying, but no faces. Every image had the faces blacked out, burned away, smeared, scratched, some violently, some surgically. I moved deeper, running trembling fingers over one frame. My skin prickled. This one, I knew this one. It was the night of the Winter Gala, 1997. I remembered the dress. I remembered the cold. I remember my mother playing a Chopin prelude that made the entire room go still. But the figures in the photo were wrong. There were too many. They blurred at the edges. Some had extra limbs. Some didn't touch the floor. And there, in the bottom corner, barely visible, was a child's face. Mine, not scratched out, staring directly at the camera. I stumbled backward, panic rising. I turned, meaning to run, only to find the hallway had stretched. The door was gone, or farther. I couldn't tell. I was disoriented. My breath came fast. The photographs began to hum, a low vibration, like static electricity building in the air. And then voices, soft at first, layered, male, female, children, all whispering the same thing. Do you remember? I spun in place, looking for speakers, projectors, anything. But there was nothing, just the voices and the photographs. Then something slammed behind me. A panel in the wall fell open, revealing a second chamber. I moved inside before I could think. This room was darker, colder, and lined not with photographs, but portraits, painted in oils, hung neatly in rows like a gallery, each one lit by a dim bulb overhead, and each one featured someone I recognized. Jean, the waitress, the old man from the library, the grocer, even the child on the bicycle, all painted with exquisite, unsettling detail. And beneath each one, a small brass plaque etched with dates, not birth dates or death dates, but the same day, December 12th, 1997, the night of the gala, the night my mother vanished. My knees gave. I crouched there, breath ragged, staring at the impossible collection. These weren't paintings. They were warnings. A ledger, a gallery of those claimed. And at the end of the row, facing a mirror, was a canvas covered in cloth. I crawled to it, unable to stop myself. I pulled the cloth away. It was my portrait, older, present day, eyes wide, jaw slightly open like I was about to scream. The plaque beneath was blank, save for a single initial. See, my body locked, and in the mirror across from it, I saw myself reflected. But I wasn't alone. Behind me stood a woman, pale, dark hair, wearing a red dress I hadn't seen since I was a child. My mother, or what was left of her. Her eyes didn't meet mine in the glass. She stared past me, through me, her mouth opened. "Leave," she whispered. I turned to face her, but the room was empty. The reflection remained. She was still there, in the mirror, trapped, ageless. Her hands pressed the glass. The lights flickered. The hum grew louder. And suddenly, the portraits began to bleed. Crimson seeped from the eyes, from the mouths, from the canvases themselves, as if the paint could no longer contain the truth. I ran, through the hall, past the whispering photographs, back into the ballroom where the chandelier now swung violently, casting fractured light across the walls like knives. I didn't stop until I reached the door, panting, heart thrumming like it would burst. As I collapsed on the front steps of the hotel, the wind picked up, and from inside, faint and clear, I heard the piano. Not a recording, not a hallucination. Real, present, playing the same prelude my mother played that night. But this time, it wasn't beautiful. It was broken, dissonant, desperate, like fingers bleeding across ivory. And then silence, and then nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, because now I knew the ballroom didn't haunt people. It absorbed them, collected them, held them still while the world moved on. And I had been next. But I wasn't running. Not yet, because somewhere in those walls, behind the portraits and the whispers and the mirror, I was born into this. Inheritance isn't always money or property. Sometimes it's unfinished sentences, buried guilt, rooms you're never supposed to enter, and questions you were never meant to ask. My father's journal had more to say. I found it again on the third morning, tucked between the floorboards under his bed. The entries near the end were different, less clinical, more fragmented. She watches from the mirrors now. One said, another, I tried to undo it, tried to pull her out, but the hotel holds on. And then, Claire is the key. She was born after the design. She carries a null. I didn't know what that meant. Not then, but it stuck to my mind like pitch, refusing to be forgotten. The next page was a sketch, a crude drawing of the ballroom, the third floor of the stage, and a network of tunnels underneath, like roots beneath a dying tree. At the center, marked in red, was the word core. I stared at it for hours, tracing lines with my fingertips, trying to make sense of how a hotel could have a core like a machine, like a living thing. And I realized something terrifying. My father hadn't just worked for the Atwell Grand. He hadn't just managed it. He had built it, not the original structure. No, that had existed long before. But everything else, the third floor, the chamber, the systems of observation and manipulation, he had designed those. He had turned a place of elegance into a theater of psychological collapse. Why? The answer came in the form of a letter, hidden in the attic, sealed in a box labeled confession. It was addressed to me, his handwriting, shaky, desperate. Claire, if you're reading this, then I failed. I thought I could fix what I broke. I thought I could trap in routine, starve it of memory, bury it beneath nostalgia. But it feeds off us, off emotion, off memory. Off you, you're the only part it can't replicate, the only one it couldn't predict. I didn't want to involve you, but I realized now you were always part of it, not just born into it, designed for it. Your mother knew. That's why she tried to stop the gala. That's why they silenced her. And I let them. I thought I'd have time to get her out. But the hotel is stronger than guilt, stronger than love. It only understands silence and sacrifice. I wish I could tell you how to end it, but all I know is this. Don't trust what it shows you. Don't trust what you remember. And whatever you do, don't let it make you perform. I folded the letter slowly, my fingers numb. So that was a legacy, not an inheritance of land or money, but a puzzle of horrors passed down like a bloodstain in the family line. And I was its final piece. That night, I returned to the hotel, not with anger, not with fear, but with resignation. I walked to the ballroom slowly, tracing my fingers along the walls, the edges of the stage, the piano keys that no longer sang. The building had become quieter, as if holding its breath, or listening. I went to the mirror where I had last seen her. My mother. The surface was now opaque, cloudy. I pressed my palm to it. I'm still here. I whispered. My reflection did not respond. Not immediately. But then it blinked. Not me. It. She. My mother. Eyes filled with something that wasn't relief or sadness, but warning. I staggered back. The mirror shimmered. Beneath its surface, something moved. Images, fragments, memories not my own. A wedding in the ballroom. Laughter. A fight in the hallway. A child crying behind a locked door. All pieces of lives absorbed by this place. stored in its walls like seeds waiting for water. Then, one final image. My mother, seated in the observation chair, tears streaking down her face, mouthing something I couldn't hear. The lights flickered. I turned to see the chandelier begin to descend. Not swing, not shake, but lower, as though drawn by a pulley I could not see. Beneath it, a trapdoor opened. Dust flew, and at the center, a spiral staircase, leading down, deeper than before, deeper than blueprints allowed. I stood at the edge, the air below colder than death. I thought about turning back, about walking away. But what was left for me out there? The house? The town? The silence? No, the answers were down there. And maybe so was she. I began my descent. Every step a surrender, every breath another goodbye. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew what I wouldn't be anymore. A bystander, a survivor, an heir. I was the last Atwell. And I had come to end the silence. There's a moment when obsession stops being a choice, when it becomes a current too strong to fight, pulling you under with memories you didn't know were yours, images that blink behind your eyelids even when you're awake. That's what descending those stairs felt like drowning in something my family had built but never understood. The spiral beneath the ballroom stretched further than physics allowed. Walls turned to stone, then steel, then something older, darkness that shimmered faintly, as if memory itself had been carved into the surface. I stopped counting steps. I stopped thinking. I just followed the cold downward pull into the heart of the Atwell Grand, where light itself felt afraid to linger. The chamber at the bottom wasn't a room. It was a dome, vast, breathless, covered wall to wall with mirrors. Hundreds, thousands, layered and angled so that no matter where I stood, I was reflected infinitely. Fractured, stretched, shrunk, multiplied. I couldn't find myself. Only pieces. And at the center of it all, a single piano. Grand, pristine, black lacquer gleaming beneath a beam of white light from nowhere. The bench was empty. The keys untouched. But the moment I stepped forward, music began. Soft at first. A single note. Then two. Then a cascade of chords that rose and fell like breath. The piano was playing itself. But no, not quite, because the keys weren't moving. The sound wasn't coming from the instrument. It was coming from the mirrors, from behind them. A recording? No, too organic, too raw. Someone was playing, and it wasn't for an audience. It was for survival. I stepped closer, the music growing louder, more chaotic, dissonant, then melodic, then something in between. A symphony without structure. Emotion without clarity. It was like listening to madness performed beautifully. I reached the bench and sat down. The moment I did, the music stopped. Silence pressed in. The mirrors dimmed. And then a spotlight bloomed above me. Hot, blinding. My hands hovered over the keys. And without my permission, they began to play. I watched horrified as my fingers moved with purpose. Fluid, skilled, exact. They played a piece I didn't know, but my body did. A melody so familiar it made me cry. My mother's music. But it had changed. Now it screamed beneath the beauty. A warning woven into each arpeggio. A desperate plea disguised as harmony. I tried to stop. I tried to pull away. But my body wouldn't listen. I was a performer now. The air. The final act. Around me, the mirrors began to shimmer. And within them, scenes, glimpses of the others. Jean, trapped in a loop behind a diner counter, serving coffee to shadows. The old man in the library, tearing out pages of books that grew back instantly. The child, pedaling endlessly through fog. Their obsessions made real, eternal. The hotel had taken them, not through death, but through compulsion, through perfect reenactment. It didn't need ghosts. It needed memory, repetition. Ritual. It needed watchers, and it needed performers. My hands bled against the keys now. The sound sharpened, a key cracked, and still I played. I understood now. This was the core, not mechanical, not mystical, psychological, a space built to harvest identity until it could reconstruct it, over and over, perfectly. The ultimate tribute to nostalgia, to pain, to things too sacred or shameful to forget. My mother had played here for days, maybe years, until the music was all that was left of her. My father had designed it, believing he could contain it, repurpose it, perhaps even use it to bring her back. But it had used him instead. And me, what was I? A daughter? A key? A finale? I screamed, finally finding my voice. The sound cracked the illusion. The spotlight flickered. My hand stopped. The music shattered. The mirrors began to ripple, as if breathing. One by one, they went dark. I stood, breath ragged, blood dripping from my fingertips onto the white floor. Then came the whisper, not words, a tone, a feeling, like someone asking, "Will you stay?" I shook my head, and the room began to collapse. Not physically, but perceptually. The piano melted into shadow. The mirrors blurred into ash. The light faded. I turned and ran, up the stairs that now pulsed beneath my feet, back through corridors that bent in impossible angles, past doorways that led nowhere. The hotel rejected me now. I was no longer part of performance. I burst into the ballroom just as dawn broke. The chandelier had fallen, shattered glass glinting like teeth across the floor. The air was cold, final. I walked through it slowly, barefoot, bleeding, shaking. I made it outside just as the sun cut through the mist. And for the first time, I saw the hotel as it truly was, rotted, broken, hollow, a skeleton. The grandeur was illusion, a projection, a stage. And now that the audience was gone, the performance had ended. I collapsed onto the steps, unable to cry, unable to feel. Just still, empty. The symphony had ended, and with it, the obsession. But I knew it wasn't over. Not truly, because the Atwell Grand didn't die. It waited for the next story, the next performer, the next song. And as I closed my eyes, I swore I heard it again. One final note, one final breath, one final chord echoing from the heart of the hotel. Waiting. Grief is a language no one teaches you. It slips in between syllables, cloaking ordinary things in unbearable meaning. Dust on a piano key, the smell of varnish, the outline of a handprint fading on a mirror. I spent the next 3 days locked inside my father's house, not speaking, barely eating. The Atwell Grand loomed in the distance like a hallucination, visible from every window, no matter the angle. It had receded into its facade of decay, but I knew better now. I knew it could wake again. It only needed someone to listen. I sat on the living room floor surrounded by boxes, junk mostly, remnants of a lifelong buried beneath obsession. But in the bottom drawer a locked cabinet, I found something that didn't belong to him, a box labeled Eleanor, Private. I opened it with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Inside were letters, dozens, all handwritten, all unsent, all addressed to me. My throat closed as I read the first line of the top letter, her familiar script slanting across the page like a song half remembered. Claire, I hope you never read this. I hope by the time you're old enough, I'll have taken you away from here. My heart cracked. I read on. There's something wrong with the hotel. It's not just the people. It's the way it watches. I hear things in the walls when I play. I see things in the mirrors. Sometimes I play songs I don't know, but my hands move like they've known them forever. Sometimes I think the hotel is writing through me. I flip to the next letter, then the next. Each one charted her descent, not into madness, but into clarity. She had known, before the gala, before the third floor. She had pieced it together in silence, in music. They want to perform at the winter gala. One read, "They say it's for charity, but I've seen the plans. It's not for the town. It's for the project, for the observation team. I don't think they'll let me leave afterward." I felt her fear etched into every word, felt the weight of what she'd tried to protect me from. Claire, if something happens to me, don't trust the hotel. It doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. And it doesn't let go. One letter stopped me cold. It was dated December 10th, 1997, 2 days before she vanished. Raymond has changed. He's more obsessed than ever. I asked him what the gala was really for, and he said, It's not a show. It's a calibration. I asked what he meant. He wouldn't answer. He just stared at the ballroom and whispered, "We're all performers now." I dropped the page, bile rising in my throat. My father hadn't just been a caretaker. He had been a conductor, a collaborator, maybe even a believer. Another letter, dated the day of the gala. If you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. I'm sorry. I tried. I wanted to sing you to sleep one more time. I wanted to take you away, show you a world without velvet ropes and broken chandeliers. But I couldn't. The hotel has me now, and I'm afraid if you ever come back, it'll take you too. I collapsed, weeping for the first time in what felt like years. Not for the horror, not even for the loss, but for the silence, the years I had blamed her, the years I believed she'd abandoned me, when all along she'd been fighting to keep me safe from the very thing that raised me. She hadn't left me. She protected me with her disappearance. These weren't just letters. They were instructions, warnings, love coded and desperate. She knew I'd come back. She knew the hotel would call me eventually, and she tried to leave a map, not one of doors or staircases, but of emotion, of truth, of identity. I read every letter, each one a key turning in a lock buried inside me. By the time I finished, the sun had risen. The light didn't feel warm. It felt like exposure, like revelation. And I knew what I had to do. One letter, her last, ended with a line that changed everything. If you want to end it, you'll have to play one last time, but not the way they want you to. Play for no one. Play to remember. That's the only way to silence it. I folded the letter and placed it in my pocket. My hands no longer shook. The grief had burned down into something purer. Not rage, not resolve, just clarity. The Atwell Grand had used her. It had tried to use me. But maybe, just maybe, we could be more than its echoes. Maybe I could rewrite the music. Not for an audience. Not for a calibration. For us. One last song. One last performance. But this time, on my terms, I returned to the hotel as the sky began to bruise. The horizon split between fading light and a darkness that had nothing to do with night. I carried nothing but her letter in my coat pocket, and the weight of it might as well have been an anchor around my ribs. I walked slowly up the front steps of the Atwell Grand, past the rusted gates, the split stone columns, the rotting doormat that still lied its welcome. The air smelled of metal and cold dust. My father's silence followed me like a shadow. I knew what I would find now, not ghosts or phantoms, but design, intention. My father had carved this place into memory, etched it with lies that sang through music and performance. It wasn't haunted, it was engineered, and he was the architect. Inside, the ballroom was dark. The chandelier had fallen days ago, its jagged glass teeth glittering faintly in the moonlight filtering through broken panes. The floor creaked with every step. This place, once grand, once admired, now felt like a lie unraveling beneath its own weight. I didn't stop in the ballroom. I turned toward the west wing, past the curtain, past the red door, deeper into the corridors that had no place on any blueprint. The path had changed again. The hotel was shifting, rearranging itself like a stage set for its final act. I followed the narrowing hallway into the belly of the building, into the stairwells behind forgotten storage rooms and the ventilation shafts that carried whispers instead of air. At the heart of it all, I found a door I'd never seen before, one that hadn't existed in any of the journals, any of the plans. A door marked only with the initials R.A., my father. I stood frozen, hand hovering over the brass knob. The metal was warm. I turned it. The room inside was impossibly clean. White walls, a single bulb overhead, and in the center his study, reconstructed, his desk, his chair, every note he'd ever written pinned to the walls in perfect symmetry, and on the desk a single audio tape, labeled, "Claire, if you found this." I slid it into the old player beside it and pressed play. His voice came through, slow and tired. "Claire," he began, "if you're hearing this, I've failed in every way that matters. I lied to your mother. I lied to you. and I convinced myself I was protecting something worth saving. I sat down, the letter clenched in my hand. It was never just a hotel. That ballroom, it was a prototype, designed to isolate memory and amplify emotion. The chamber beneath it, the mirrors, they weren't experiments. They were tools. And your mother was the only one who ever broke through. She played not for calibration, but for resistance. She played to forget, to disarm the system. And I let them take her anyway. I couldn't breathe. I thought if I stayed behind, if I maintained the patterns, dusting the ballroom, fixing the stage, running the tapes, I could keep the hotel asleep. I thought the rituals would stop it from evolving. But I was wrong. The hotel doesn't sleep. It waits. It listens. And it needed you, not because of who you are, but because of what you remember. The tape hissed for a moment. Then I designed the third floor, Claire. I built it from memory loops, from psychological blueprints. It was never physical. It was never real. It was always built from emotion, guilt, grief, obsession. That's why no one could find it. You don't walk into the third floor. You descend into yourself. My blood turned to ice. You carry it with you. Every time you question your past. Every time you replay the final memory. You are the third floor now. That's the price of inheritance. The tape clicked off. I sat in silence for a long time. My father hadn't died. He had surrendered. His guilt had written itself into the walls of this place. He had become part of it, like my mother, like everyone else. I looked around the room again and realized nothing here was real. It was memory, projection. The study had burned down in 2003. I remembered the flames. I remembered the heat. And yet here it was, perfectly preserved, built not from brick or wood, but from guilt. The hotel had tricked him into trying to fix it, and in doing so, it kept him. It kept all of them. And now it wanted me. But I had her letter. I had the truth. I stood, turned, and faced a mirror mounted on the wall, where his reflection should have been. And there he was, my father, gaunt, unmoving, eyes hollow but watching. "Claire," he said, though his lips didn't move, "you came back." "I had to." "You shouldn't have. You built this." "I built it to contain it," he said. "But you opened the door. Now you have to close it." "How?" "The same way she tried." He said, "Play for no one. Remember everything. And then forget." I stared at him. "And what happened to you?" "I've already happened," he whispered. "I'm just echo now." I reached for the mirror. He didn't reach back. I left the room. Behind me, the tape rewound itself. The lights flickered out. The study faded into shadow. I walked back into the corridor, into the ballroom, into the space that had held so much memory it had turned into hunger. I climbed the stage, sat at the piano. I opened her letter. "One last time. Don't perform," she wrote. "Play to end it." So I did. I played a lullaby, not a song of loss, a song of release, a song without applause, without audience. Each note cracked the walls. Each chord shattered another layer of illusion. The mirrors splintered. The portraits burned. The photographs curled and turned to dust. And when I stopped, there was silence. Real silence. Not watching. Not waiting. Just peace. I stood. The ballroom was gone. Not destroyed. Just emptied. The hotel had no more use for performance. The architect was undone. And all that was left was me. You would expect there to be a moment, a sound, a crack, some cinematic cue that marked the end of something so vast, so insidious, that it changed everything around it. But there wasn't. No explosion. No dramatic collapse. No final scream from the walls. When the last note faded from the piano, the hotel simply quieted, as if a breath had finally been released after years held hostage. I sat in the stillness of the ballroom, surrounded by dust that no longer moved, beneath the fractured remains of a chandelier that would never sway again. I waited for something, relief, catharsis, collapse, but all that arrived was an ache. Deep, bone deep, the kind that doesn't roar, but lingers. I stepped down from the stage and found the space unchanged, but also unrecognizable. The shadows had lost their sharpness. The corners no longer whispered. The walls, once alive with a pulse, were flat and silent. I wandered through the rooms like a stranger inside my own story, trying to trace the seams between performance and reality. And then I heard it. Not the hum of power, not the dissonant chords that had once stalked me in dreams. Applause. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. A rhythm of palms striking palms. Not celebratory, not cruel, something in between. A ritual, a farewell. It came from above, from the third floor that no longer existed. I climbed, not to the hidden stairwells or the bending passageways, but through the main staircase, the one that had always been locked, always sealed with warnings and excuses. The banister was dust-covered, the air colder with each step. When I reached the top, the corridor was there, whole, as if it had never been taken apart. The walls were lined with doors, all open now. Inside each room, a chair, just one, facing the hallway, empty, except for one. At the end, room 313, my mother's room, the place where she disappeared. I stepped inside and saw her, not the mirror version, not the echo or the performance, but her, a woman sitting by the window, in a red dress, hair loose, fingers laced in her lap. She turned slowly. Her eyes met mine, and they were tired, but clear. "You played it," she said softly. "You played it the right way." I couldn't move. I didn't know what I was doing. I said, "I just remembered." She stood, approached me, placed her hand on my cheek. Warm, real. That's all it ever asked for. To be remembered, and then to be released. "Are you free now?" "I think so," she whispered. "And you?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. She kissed my forehead. "Then it's time." She turned, walked past me, out the door, down the hallway. And when I looked back, the room was empty again. The red dress gone. The dust had returned. The window was closed. I stepped back into the corridor. The applause had stopped. The third floor shimmered, and then vanished, not in a flash, but like a photograph being exposed to light too long. Fading, gentle. I descended the stairs, each step echoing like a heartbeat slowly quieting. Back through the ballroom, through the foyer, out the front door. And when I stepped onto the porch, the morning sun split across the hills like a promise. The hotel stood behind me. Whole, but different. Not grand, not grotesque. Just still. I turned one last time and looked through the tall glass window of the ballroom. And there they were, the audience, dozens of them, faces I knew, faces I didn't, all seated in rows of chairs, their hands folded in their laps, silent, watching, but no longer waiting. They didn't move, they didn't breathe, they didn't fade. They were not prisoners anymore. They were memory, and memory, once witnessed and honored, no longer needed to haunt. I raised my hand, a small gesture, a thank you, a goodbye, and then I walked away, down the winding path, past the broken sign, past the rusted gates, back into the world. I never turned back, because the Atwell Grand had received its finale, and in its silence, I found mine. I wish I could say leaving Halverton felt like an escape, like stepping across some invisible threshold between then and now. Nightmare and memory. But it wasn't that clean. I left the Atwell Grand behind me, its windows dark, its doors still. But it didn't feel like I'd walked away from something. It felt like I had been placed somewhere else entirely, and the world I'd known before, the ordinary one, was no longer quite intact. I drove for hours that morning, the sky bright but cold, the highway almost unnaturally empty. Somewhere outside of town, I pulled off at a rest stop and sat in the car for what might have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. Time had become a thread someone else was pulling. I reread her last letter. My mother's final words weren't instructions. They were gratitude. "You gave me silence," she wrote. "And after all the noise, that's the greatest mercy anyone can give." That line echoed in my chest, heavy and warm and unbearable. I thought for a time that I would find peace in that ending, that the unraveling had reached its final thread, and I could begin again, different, bruised, but free. But you don't leave the third floor. Not really, because it isn't a floor. It isn't a location. It's a memory that watches you from the quiet spaces in your mind. The sound of a piano playing in an empty room, the weight of a key in your coat pocket that doesn't belong to any door you recognize, the moment you catch your own reflection looking back a beat too late. I moved to a new city, took a job in restoration. Old buildings, churches, train stations. I thought I'd find comfort in architecture again. I thought I'd rebuild something that couldn't fracture. But even now, as I run my hand along a banister or scrape paint from century-old plaster, I hear it sometimes. That low hum, that faint applause. I've burned every letter, donated every blueprint. The Atwell Grand is gone. Not physically, it still stands. But no one goes near it. The land is overgrown. The access road is blocked by city ordinance. And yet I know it breathes. Quietly, patiently, because someone else will come. Someone always does. Not out of curiosity, but out of inheritance. The kind of inheritance that has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with forgetting too much or not enough. They'll find the ballroom. They'll see their reflection in the polished floor. They'll hear the first note of a song they don't remember knowing. And the third floor will open, not above, not below, but within. That's what it does. That's what it is. The third floor isn't a place. It's a state of mind, a chamber in your memory where the lights never quite go out. It doesn't begin with music or mirrors or whispers in the walls. It begins with grief, real grief, the kind that makes you question what you lost, and worse, whether you ever had it all. That's how it begins. That's how it waits. That's how it lives. I don't speak of the hotel anymore. Not aloud. I don't answer letters from local historians or journalists who want to do exposés on disappearances. I don't return to Halverton, and I've made peace with knowing I never will. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of the chandelier, not falling, but swaying, just slightly, as if moved by something too subtle for wind. And I wake with her voice in my ears, soft as dusk. Don't forget, not even the silence. And I remember the truth, the terrifying, beautiful truth. The third floor never ends.